It was a typical Friday night. The kind of evening where everything felt effortless. The restaurant was a cozy place, dimly lit with soft music playing in the background. My friends and I had been coming here for years, and tonight we were celebrating nothing in particular. Just the usual: food, drinks, and laughter. I glanced around at the familiar faces: Sarah, with her ever-present smile, Jake, the jokester, Lily, who always had something to say, no matter the topic, and of course, Mark, my husband, sitting across from me, quietly sipping his wine. We had been married for 5 years, and I always thought we were solid. Secure. Unbreakable, even. Sure, there were the usual ups and downs, but nothing that couldn't be worked through. I had never seen any cracks in our relationship, not even in moments when things got tough. But that night, as we all sat around the table laughing about one thing or another, something shifted. It started innocently enough. Sarah, with her sharp wit, was going on about how much she hated her job, and she was ranting about her boss's latest ridiculous demand. "Ugh, he wants me to finish the report in 3 hours. Can you believe that?" she exclaimed, rolling her eyes. 3 hours? That's absurd. He might as well ask you to grow a few inches while you're at it, Jake quipped, chuckling. Well, that's a bit of a tall order, I added, laughing along with the group. I glanced over at Mark, who was always the quiet one, but I could see the glint of amusement in his eyes. "You're telling me," Mark said dryly, "I've been trying to grow taller for years." I laughed harder than I should have, more out of reflex than actual humor. "Yeah, well, Mark, you've been the same height since high school, right? What's it been, 5 feet, 8 inches of pure charm?" I could feel the air shift slightly as I said it. A few snickers rang out around the table, but Mark's smile faltered for just a moment. It was so quick, so subtle, that I didn't think much of it. He pushed his wine glass away from him, seemingly more absorbed in his food than the conversation. "Mark, come on," I said, nudging him playfully with my elbow. It was a joke. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I know. It's fine." But something in his voice didn't sound fine. The moment passed quickly, and the conversation moved on. I didn't think much of it, honestly. It was just a joke. That's all it was. Nothing serious. Mark had always been good-natured about teasing, especially when it came to his height. We had joked about it before, so why should this time be any different? The rest of the evening went on without any noticeable change. We finished our meals, laughed at a few more jokes, and said our goodbyes. Mark was still quiet, but I chalked it up to the fact that he wasn't much of a talker in social settings, especially when there were a lot of people around. As we left the restaurant, I linked my arm with his, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "Had fun tonight?" I asked, smiling. "Yeah, it was fine," he replied, his tone almost flat. I tried not to let the small crack in his voice bother me. We got into the car, and I turned on the radio, humming along to the music. But as I glanced over at him, I noticed his face, tighter than usual, his jaw clenched. His hands, usually resting calmly on the steering wheel, were now gripping it with a strange intensity. "Mark, are you okay?" I asked, my voice softening. "You seem a little off tonight." He glanced at me quickly, as though snapping out of a trance. "I'm fine. Just tired." "Tired?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "From what?" "You didn't do anything today but sit at your desk and go to the gym." He didn't answer right away, and that silence stretched between us, uncomfortable and heavy. I turned my gaze back to the window, unsure of how to break the tension. When we got home, I went straight to the bathroom to wash up. I expected Mark to follow me, but he didn't. I heard him in the kitchen, moving around quietly, like he was trying to avoid me. "Mark?" I called from the bathroom. "What's going on?" There was a long pause before he answered. "I told you, nothing's wrong." But I didn't believe him. I had known him for too long to ignore the subtle cues, the way he had withdrawn just a little bit. Something about that joke, it lingered in the air between us. It had been a stupid comment, something offhand, but the way he had reacted, it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like something deeper, something that had been simmering under the surface for a while. I didn't know it then, but that simple, careless remark was the spark that would ignite a slow-burning fire in our relationship. Something that would lead us to places neither of us was prepared for. And I was the one who had started it. The days that followed felt like a strange dream, one where everything was fine on the surface but hollow underneath. Mark wasn't acting like himself, but he wasn't exactly pulling away either. He was distant in a way that was hard to pinpoint. It wasn't like he was angry or upset, but there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air whenever we were in the same room. He still smiled, still kissed me good morning, but there was a coolness to his touch, a certain restraint in his eyes. The evening after the dinner, we didn't speak much. He went straight to the living room and sat on the couch, flicking through TV channels, his body tense. I joined him later, sitting beside him, trying to initiate some casual conversation. "So," I began, hesitating slightly as I tried to gauge his mood, "I've been thinking. Maybe we should go out of town for the weekend. You know, just the two of us? We could visit that little cabin in the mountains we used to talk about." He looked at me, almost as if startled by the suggestion, before nodding vaguely. "Yeah, sure. Maybe," he muttered, not meeting my gaze. I couldn't remember the last time he'd responded like that to an idea I was excited about. Mark had always been the one to suggest spontaneous trips, to get us out of the house when things felt routine. But now, it felt like I was pulling him along, trying to make something work that wasn't there anymore. The next few days were more of the same. I noticed how often he became absorbed in his phone or how he'd retreat to the garage when I was cooking dinner, disappearing for hours without explanation. It wasn't that he was ignoring me outright, but something had changed. And it wasn't just the usual exhaustion from work. I could feel it in the way he avoided me, avoided any real conversation. At night, when we got into bed, there was a familiar space between us, like a silent wall had been built that neither of us knew how to tear down. I couldn't help but wonder if the joke from the dinner was really the cause. But what about it had made him pull so far back? It didn't make sense. After a few days of the same, I finally decided to confront him. I'd had enough of the unspoken tension, of his withdrawal. I couldn't go on pretending like everything was fine. I needed to know what was wrong. "Mark," I said one evening, as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table. He was picking at his food, eyes focused on his plate. I could feel my heart racing, the words struggling to escape. "We need to talk." He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the urgency in my voice. "What's there to talk about?" "Don't play this game with me, Mark," I snapped, frustration bubbling up. "You've been acting weird ever since that dinner. Something's off, and you won't even tell me what it is. Is it because of the joke?" At that, he finally looked up, his face unreadable. His lips were tight, jaw clenched as if he was holding something back. "What joke?" "The one I made about your height," I said, my voice softer now. I didn't want to make him feel cornered, but I needed him to open up. "Mark, I didn't mean to hurt you. It was just... I don't even know why I said it. It was stupid." He stared at me, his eyes cold and distant. "Yeah, it was stupid." I opened my mouth to say something more, but the words stuck in my throat. The look in his eyes, there was something there that made me uneasy. A hurt I hadn't seen before. "Mark, what's going on?" I asked, my voice faltering. He exhaled sharply, as though the weight of what he was about to say had been building for days. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "It's not just the joke. It's everything. The way you always make fun of it. It's like you don't even see it, the thing that makes me feel less than. You just laugh it off. Like it's nothing." I froze, not sure if I understood what he meant. "What do you mean?" "I've been this height for my entire life," he continued, his tone bitter now. "Always the smallest in the room, always overlooked. But with you, I thought it didn't matter. I thought you loved me for who I was. And maybe you do. But when you joke about it like it's nothing, it feels like you're just confirming everything I've ever feared." I sat back, stunned. For years, I'd known Mark had some insecurities about his height. I knew he sometimes felt self-conscious, but I never thought it was something that could break us. I had no idea it ran this deep. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know it bothered you that much. I honestly thought it was just a funny thing between us." He looked at me then, his eyes searching my face. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just a joke. It's a reminder of how I'll never measure up. I've spent my whole life being told I'm not enough. And every time you make a joke about my height, it's like you're just adding to that." I felt a lump form in my throat. The words, the weight of his pain, it hit me harder than I expected. All this time, I thought I was just being playful. But I had hurt him. And now, I was beginning to see the extent of it. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with force. "I need some space," he muttered, walking away from the table, leaving me sitting there, stunned and lost. I couldn't move, couldn't process what had just happened. My mind raced, replaying the conversation over and over. The joke. My innocent, thoughtless words. They had shattered something I hadn't even realized was fragile. It wasn't just about the height. It was everything, the years of built-up insecurity, the times he'd hidden his true feelings, the cracks he'd kept hidden. And I had just exposed them. The days after that conversation felt like I was walking through fog. The weight of everything Mark had said, everything he had kept buried inside, sat on my chest, making it hard to breathe. He wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. Our house, once filled with the easy rhythm of two people who understood each other, now felt like a battlefield, even though no one was speaking. I tried to reach out to him, to apologize, to make things right, but every time I approached him, he pulled away. He became even more withdrawn, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us. He'd leave early in the morning, and when he came home, it was like he wasn't really there. He moved through the house like a ghost, and I was the one still trying to piece together what had happened, what had gone wrong. One evening, when he didn't come home until late, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd been patient, I'd given him space, but this silence, this endless void, was suffocating me. I had to know if there was any chance we could fix this, if there was any part of our marriage worth saving. I waited for him to walk through the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment he stepped inside, I stood up, facing him, not knowing exactly what I was going to say. But I knew I had to speak. "Mark," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to talk." He looked at me, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. A mixture of resignation and pain. He didn't answer right away, just took off his coat and hung it on the hook by the door. I could feel the tension in the room thickening, thick enough to suffocate us both. "Can we just talk?" I asked again, desperate for a way back, desperate for any sign that this wasn't the end. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and then nodded slowly. "What's there to talk about?" It hurt to hear him say that. His voice was flat, distant. But I pushed forward, unwilling to let go without at least trying. "I want to understand, Mark," I began. "I want to understand why everything changed after that dinner. You won't talk to me, you won't look at me, and it's breaking me. It's breaking us." He didn't respond immediately, but I could see the shift in his body. He was tense, fighting something inside himself. Then, with a heavy sigh, he spoke, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice quieter now, but still carrying that edge of frustration. "It's not just the joke. It's not just one thing. It's how I've always felt. Like I'm not enough. Like you, everyone, sees me as something lesser. And I guess I thought you wouldn't be like that, but I was wrong." I swallowed, my chest tightening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I knew he had insecurities, but I had no idea they ran this deep. All the years we'd been together, all the times he'd smiled and laughed at my jokes about his height, I never realized it was hurting him. "I never wanted you to feel that way," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear I didn't. You're everything to me. I never saw you as lesser. I don't see you as anything less than amazing." But he shook his head, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite name. "It's too late for that. It's too late for apologies." I felt my heart shatter in my chest. "What are you saying, Mark? Are you saying, we're done?" He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in days. There was something raw in his gaze, something almost fragile, but it was also filled with anger, sadness, and resignation. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if we can go back to what we had. All I know is, I don't feel like I'm enough anymore. Not for you. Not for anyone." His words felt like a punch to my gut, but I didn't know how to fight them. I wanted to argue, to tell him that we could work through this, that we could find our way back to each other. But the truth was, I didn't know if we could. I didn't know if the damage had been done already. "I love you," I said, my voice shaking as I reached for him, wanting to touch him, wanting to make him understand. "I love you, and I didn't mean to make you feel like this." He stepped back, his eyes filled with unshed tears, but his expression was hard. "It's not just about love. It's about trust. It's about feeling like you're seen, like you're valued. And I haven't felt that in a long time. I don't think I can do this anymore, not like this." I wanted to scream, to beg him not to leave, not to walk away from us. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Something had broken between us. And no matter how much I loved him, no matter how sorry I was, I couldn't undo what I had done. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of everything we had lost hanging between us. Finally, Mark turned away, heading toward the door. He stopped before leaving, glancing back at me one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I think it's over." And with that, he walked out, leaving me standing in the empty room, my heart in pieces. I wanted to chase after him, to beg him to stay, but I knew, deep down, that this was the moment everything changed. I had broken something in him, something I couldn't fix with a few words or promises. As the door closed behind him, I felt the finality of it all. We were done. And it was all because of a joke, one that I never thought would have such power, such consequence. It was the smallest thing, but it had shattered everything we built. I sank to the floor, my body trembling, as the reality of our divorce settled in around me. I had lost him. And I wasn't sure I would ever be able to forgive myself for it.